So how do we make sense of inexpensive versus expensive guitars? Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, I'm Jack Fossett. Welcome to the channel. This is a new series I'm doing called Real Guitar Talk. This is a series where I want to tackle some issues that I think are worth talking about more than just the usual phrases that we like to throw around to make ourselves seem smart and wise. So today what I want to talk about are inexpensive guitars versus expensive guitars and the conflict that arises not only between players but also inner conflict. This is going to get psychological. I may or may not get on a soapbox during this video. Just FYI, let's get that out of the way. Now, I want to start with a quick anecdote that's kind of a metaphor for what we're talking about, and hopefully this will give you an idea of my perspective on this. I'm going to talk about one of my first cars. It was a car that I absolutely loved. It was a Subaru Impreza Outback Sport. Some of you might know about this type of car. It was a little like Subaru Impreza sedan, but it had the hatchback, so they called it the Outback Sport. It was my first stick shift, and I absolutely loved that car. I had it in high school, and I still had it after I met my wife, so it covered a very significant time in my life. That wasn't the best car. It wasn't the best car even that I've ever owned. I've owned other cars that are nicer than that. But I loved that car. It has a very special place in my heart, and it got me where I needed to go. It wasn't as nice as a Lexus. It wasn't as nice as a Mercedes. Ironically, I drive a Mercedes right now, but it's not what you think. I actually have 6 kids, and they don't make station wagons anymore, so I drive this monstrosity. We call it the Black Pearl. No big deal. If someone told me I was going to drive a Benz one day, that's not exactly what I would have pictured. I'm getting off track already. The Subaru wasn't as good as a Lexus. It wasn't as good as a BMW, but I didn't need it to be. It got me where I needed to go. I made great memories with that car. That is the attitude that I think we should be adopting with guitars to a certain extent within reason. Now, my channel has been pretty much entirely based on doing guitar reviews, and a lot of the reviews that have been more successful, that have really kind of connected me with a lot of you, have been reviews of mid-level gear that is relatively budget friendly, and I say that with all respect to people who don't have a higher budget, but things like Epiphone guitars, mid-level Fender tube amps, stuff like that. And one of the comments that I get most frequently is something to the degree of, I got this because it was the best one. I got this guitar, this whatever guitar it is. It was even better than all the higher end ones in the store. It outplayed all these. It sounded better. Da 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 da. Now, I promise I'm actually, some of you who are watching this might have left comments like this. I promise I'm not attacking you, and I'm not even necessarily disagreeing with you. I want to talk about the perspective on this. I will say that, first of all, I've had the opportunity to play a lot of gear, not just through doing gear demos, but like I used to just go spend hours in music stores. There are probably some music store workers in Maine who can attest to that and just be like, oh yeah, that Jack guy, he's wicked annoying. Anyway, I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with a lot of different gear, play a lot of different guitars at a lot of different levels, and spend a good amount of time with them. Are there instances where cheaper guitars play and sound better than higher end guitars? Yes. It's more limited than that, I think. For instance, like I have played a Squier that was better than an American Fender, but it was a high level Squier and a low level American Fender. So when you kind of compress that box a little bit, it's like, yeah, I've played Epiphones, a high end Epiphone that's better than a low end Gibson. But as soon as you start to move those brackets, it gets less and less true and very, very infrequent. So when you see that claim as much as you do, I'm not necessarily going to go around and saying like, oh, everyone who says that is wrong. But people say it more than I found it to, I suppose, statistically to be true. I have rarely played, if ever, an Epiphone hollow body that was better than a Gibson ES335. Now, keep in mind there are a couple of things that affect this if you're playing it in a store. First of all, setup has absolutely nothing to do with the quality of the guitar. There have been custom shop guitars that I've seen in stores that are poorly set up, that are really amazing guitars, and if you play a poorly set up guitar in a store, it's just going to give you a bad vibe about that guitar. Also, the gear that you play into, the amplifier that you plug into is going to make a big difference. So there are other variables, but my point is, and kind of going back to the car story, if you have an Epiphone guitar and you love that guitar, and you say, I got this because it was the best one. Maybe you felt like it was the best one. Maybe it was the best one that fit your budget. Maybe there's something about that guitar, an X factor that you just connected with. You don't need to say that to qualify the fact that you love that guitar. And the real reason I think sometimes we say things like that is because we're trying to convey to other guitar players, no, you don't understand. I know good gear. I really liked this one, because there are people out there who will put you down for the gear that you play. This even goes on into the higher end brackets. PRS players. There's some really great PRS players, so I'm not trying to throw them under the bus. But there are some, people who collect super, super high-end PRSs who will put down other high-end PRSs because they're not up to their level. Cork sniffer territory. One of my favorite guitars is a Gibson ES345. It's a stunning guitar. Some of you know it from my channel, that my wife bought me for our 10th anniversary. Is it as good as a Collings guitar? Probably not, quality-wise. Would I trade it for a Collings guitar? Absolutely not. I love that guitar. It's a great guitar. I don't need it to be better than a Collings to qualify me liking that guitar. Some of my favorite guitars aren't even as good as other guitars that I own, kind of like the car situation. And there is an air of when you kind of go down that road of kind of going a little too much down the, oh, well, this was the best. It was even better than these high-end guitars. Even if there's truth to it, there's this air of methinks he doth protest too much. It doesn't necessarily come across as genuine so much as you're kind of going overboard to qualify yourself. The problem, again, goes back to the people playing high-end guitars that will put down people playing lower-level guitars, trying to make it seem like it's some kind of a hierarchy of whoever has the nicest guitar. And this goes way beyond the guitar world, of course. This goes into all kinds of other things. My point is that if you have a guitar that you love, that you make great music on, that is enough, and it should be enough. So if somebody's going to make some snide comment about how their guitar is better, then forget them. The other thing is that then don't become the bad guy in trying to overcome the bad guy, right? Like, I'm very lucky to have a nice guitar collection. There are some people who have guitar collections that dwarf mine. There are a lot of people who would dream of having a collection like I have. I'm very, very lucky to be in the position that I'm in. So, like I mentioned about the Collings, I don't need to make somebody feel bad about owning a Collings by saying, like, whatever, I wouldn't even trade mine for that if you gave me the opportunity to. We don't need to become the bad guy in trying to sort of justify, qualify the purchase of whatever guitar at whatever level. If you play an Epiphone Sheridan and somebody comes in with a Gibson ES335, you don't need to scoff in a way and say kind of like, well, I got this because mine played better than an ES335. It's like, now you've kind of just done the same thing that what the higher end snobs are doing, but from the other side of the equation. And that just makes the problem and the divide worse. And the other thing is, and again, it goes back to that internal conflict, like, does it really matter if you thought that it was better? Is that what you're really trying to convey to someone? Or are you really trying to convey to them that, like, no, you should take me seriously even though I play a guitar that you perceive as less? I guess that's the kind of point that I'm going to. Now, there is also an ethics issue regarding craftsmanship and a broader sense of where and how guitars are made. And this is another thing. Something that has stuck with me. My bass player, Max.
This is Max. Say hi, Max. Hi, Max.
He said something that has always kind of stuck with me. And I don't want to go too far down this road, but he said, however inexpensive a guitar is directly related to how much misery the person experienced making it. Now, obviously, many of us, myself included, have smartphones, and so it's pretty hard not to get into hypocritical territory when you're talking about ethics regarding where and how things are made. That comment has always kind of haunted me, though, especially when you're talking about import guitars, when you don't really know what are the conditions of how they're made. And there are some pretty nice guitars for really inexpensive that really make me like, how is that happening? How is this even like, what is going on that someone can get a product like this at this price? Something doesn't add up there. I don't want to go too far down that road again, but that is something to think about. On the other end of the spectrum, the other thing to think about is that there are a lot of luthiers who dedicate huge parts of their life and their craft to making fine musical instruments. And we shouldn't be inadvertently tearing them down by saying that our Squiers, Epiphones, or Harley Benton's are as good. Because again, there are a lot of different factors into what makes a good guitar. Ultimately, what I would say is go back to the car analogy of like, it gets you where you're going. That part is true. But again, like my Subaru Impreza was not an Aston Martin. And I shouldn't try to say that it was, because they can both drive from point A to point B. Does that make sense? Is that too simplified? Part of it is the amplifier, again, I mentioned. So, like for instance, I plugged a really cheap $80 Dean guitar once. It wasn't even made of wood. And I plugged it into a like Marshall JVM stack. And it sounded amazing. Conversely, you could plug Gibson Custom Shop into a cheap, crappy practice amp, and it would sound cheap and crappy. My point is that don't diminish the hard work and craftsmanship that some higher up people put into their craft because you went with a less expensive guitar. And again, I also say this with all due respect to people who don't have a lot of money. It is cool that there are inexpensive guitars for people who don't have money. There's greater access to musical instruments for people in impoverished areas. There are groups donating musical instruments, and it's cool that those musical instruments that are going out there are things that they can actually play music on. I think that's a great thing about all this crazy kind of world we live in with all this stuff. And like I said, if you have a less expensive guitar that you love and you make great music on, that is enough. There are people who will put you down. There are people who will say this, that, or the other thing about you, no matter what guitar you play. It's almost irrelevant. That just gives them one more thing to tear you down for. So don't go overboard in claiming that your guitar is better than it is, or trying to convey that it's better than it is, because you need to present yourself as a higher level player. That's the point that I'm getting at. Please let us know, what do you think about all this in the comments? And again, I know that probably many of you watching this video have left comments like that, and I'm not even necessarily disagreeing. I'm not going to take it on a case-by-case basis. If you come onto the comment section and just say, well, Jack, I left this comment on your video, and I really do think that mine is, I've never played your guitar, and I've never played the other guitars you compared it to, so I'm not going to say yay or nay. I'm going to say that there are a lot of factors that go into what is a good guitar and what's not. Some of them don't necessarily come across when you're in the store. The quality of the piece of wood, the fit, the finish. Sometimes you just pick up a guitar that speaks to you. And, I've certainly played less expensive guitars that spoke to me more than higher end guitars. But again, that goes back to the point. That didn't necessarily make it a better guitar by any objective standard in which you can measure what makes a better guitar. Let us know what you think in the comments. I'm Jack Fossett. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.